It's great to see another screening for Unknown Pleasures coming up on the 18th of March. And this time it's a new film by Peter Tammer called Trip of a Lifetime. And Peter joins me on Movie Metropolis, as well as Bill Mousoulis, who is the co-curator of Unknown Pleasures. Bill and Peter, welcome again to Movie Metropolis.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
Now, Peter, I must ask you, this is a incredible footage in Trip of a Lifetime of home movies made by this family and their journeys, etc., from 1950 to 51. How did you get this footage? It's amazing.
Well, it was sort of dumped on my lap, Peter. Some elderly people at that time, 1988, I was 45, and they were the age I am now, nearly 100. And
Huh.
they rang me up to see if they told me that they had this footage that people had shot in the 50s, but the man had died and the woman had died recently. So the man had died earlier than the lady. There were no children, so they were not a family, as in a family with children and lots of relatives. So these people didn't know what to do with the film. And they must have been talking to people at the laboratories, like we used to use Vic Film Labs when I was teaching at Swinburne. And people there might have said, "Oh, you should talk to Peter Tammer. He's a teacher of filmmaking, and he also makes home movies himself and all that sort of stuff." So they rang me up and I invited them around for a cuppa. They came around with these old tins of film, cans of rusty cans with film inside, smelling of vinegar. And I didn't try to run the film on the day they were with me. I showed them my editing bench in my back room at that place in Hawthorne. And I showed them how I could wind the film over a light well and examine it with a magnifying loupe. But I didn't want to project it at that time because I was scared the film would be very fragile. And I was right. It was already very fragile. Anyhow, uh, they said they would be very happy for me to have the film. And I told them that whatever I would do with the film, I would try to respect the intentions of the people who made the film. That's sort of how the conversation ended, right? And they went on their merry way. And I never actually asked them about the names of the people. I don't know why I had this thing, but I sort of didn't want to know because I didn't want to go on a mission of looking for lots of information about these people and their lives outside of the film. I don't know why I had that intuition at the time, but I'm glad I did that now because I'm glad I know everyone in the film only as they are on the film or behind the camera, but not by any spurious extra information.
Hmm.
you know what I mean? It's not
Yes.
an information piece. And it's not a documentary that is sleuthing out why did they do this, and it's actually a bit of a jumble. And people who see the film when we show it will have to work their own way through the maze, as I've had to work my way through the maze, right? Anyhow, as you have obviously, and Bill has. Anyhow, so I had the film for a long time, and I didn't do anything serious with it until I retired from teaching in 1988. But in that period, I did try to project it a couple of times. And each time I put a reel on the very lovely projector I had that was very gentle, that stripped sprockets in the opening parts of the film. So I knew I couldn't do that. I also had what was called a HKS viewer. And that was a German made viewer that was designed to be very gentle with original 16mm film. But even it had sprockets to turn the frame, so you could see the frames turned into movie footage. And I had to bypass the sprockets and use the HKS viewer sort of as a magnifying glass.
Hmm.
So with my magnifying loop over the light well and with the HKS viewer avoiding its sprocket engagement, I was able to see that there were some beautiful images in there, but the film was warped and it was shrunken. That's why the sprockets were causing problems, or it wouldn't engage with the sprockets properly on the viewer or the projector. And so I knew I had something that was very promising, but I didn't know how I would go about restoring it or doing anything like editing it. But I didn't have to because I was so busy at the time with teaching and with starting on my film about John Flowers and everything. So I didn't really get spare time until I retired in 1988. And then I was sort of
Peter,
living on
sorry. You mean you retired in 1996 or 98?
98.
Yeah,
98. Thank you,
98,
Bill. You're
98.
on the. I just skipped 10 years. I'm good at that. Anyhow, so I retired in 1998 and I had spare time on my hands and I still had all my editing equipment and I tried to address that while I was still editing the Flowers film, but I didn't make much headway with it. Then it came to a time when my father had died and my mum had died and all the children in my family, we all received an inheritance. And I decided that I would use some of my inheritance to finish the Flowers film, which I didn't have funding for, and to get this film going. And one day I bumped into Mike Reed down at Cinevex Labs in Elstonwick, and he invited me back to his studio to have a chat. And he and I discussed what I would do to get my films both telecinied and on the road. Now, that period also was 2008. So we're talking about another 10-year lapse in my life. And so Mike introduced me to the people who were next door to his business. And I got the telecines done of the Flowers film, which allowed me to finish that film. And I got the telecines done of Trip of a Lifetime because their telecine chain had no sprocket wheels or sprocket engagement. It was just like running tape from one reel to another. And it was very gentle on film. And even my warped film rode through there quite well. But then when they made that telecine, because the film had twisted and warped and all that sort of stuff, some of the shots came up when they would be sharp in the center of the shot and out of focus on the left and right of screen, or in some cases on the left of screen, in some cases on the right of screen, but very rarely on those warped pieces of film would they be in focus across the plane of the film. So I was struggling with that telecine that I made in 2008 because it also was a low resolution telecine and it also had the interlacing lines of television in it. And it was only like 700 lines resolution. And it, I got good color grading out of it, but the resolution was terrible. See? So then another 10 years elapsed, and Bill and I discovered this chap called Callum, who had his own sprocketless telecine equipment, and he was capable of doing a 4K restoration. So eventually I paid Callum to do a 4K restoration, and that was without color grading. It was just Callum was doing it all just, at basically one light, as we would call it. And and we and there were many sections that we wound through on his telecine machine, and we thought these just look terrible. They are warped and they are damaged and they are never going to be restorable. But you've seen some of those films, so some of those scenes, and I have restored them. But it's been a long process, and it would not have been possible without AI equipment such as Topaz or with Da Vinci and all the AI tools that I've been mucking around with over the last 5 years. And it's been a steep learning curve. And every time I made an advance, I just thought, wow, I never thought this would be possible. And many of my friends like Bill or Richard or other people who would have seen the film would have said, you're mucking around with something that can't be salvaged. But I sensed that it could be, and I just soldiered on. So that's the background.
That is absolutely fascinating. I'm intrigued by a few things. First of all, I mean, the film looks great, and it's such a interesting historical and social and snapshot. Um,
Mm.
how much of what was the original running time, I suppose, if you like to put it that way?
Oh,
Oh,
approximately the same. I think that the footage they gave me at 16 frames a second would have played for about 80 to 90 minutes. And
ah,
I've made a 75-minute film out of it.
ah,
But I had to get rid of some scenes that I just could not restore.
ah.
So after multiple tries, there were some scenes I just had to give up on. And then I would get into the quandary of a scene where I had some good shots and some really bad shots, right?
Yeah.
And one of them you may remember is this guy in a backyard in the garden with the ladies, and he's got a pitchfork in his hand near his veggie patch. The first two shots of that scene didn't match up in any way with the last three or four shots. You could not match them, but I've got them to match. So I've somehow matched them.
Well,
But
well,
it took a lot of effort.
I absolutely
Oh,
understand. And I also wanted to ask you, how did you decide on the order, the chronological order in the editing process?
you've just asked me the easiest question of all time. I just stuck with the order as they came out of the four cans, one after the other.
Ah,
And by coincidence, can number four was their return to Australia from the northern part of Australia down to Melbourne
ah,
and the Moomba Festival.
ah,
I just followed the chronology of the cans, which means that the chronology is sometimes wrong because just the other day I realized I had a scene missing, and it was the scene where they go through the Suez Canal. And I had to put that in on Wednesday. So I put it in exactly where it was in the original assembly as the cans came to me. But it's sort of out of whack. It comes between scenes of England and scenes of uh, the Middle East and scenes of um, there are scenes of Scotland following it and things like that. So I don't think they went back to the sewers between England and Scotland,
Yeah.
But I've left it in the order that I found it because it's a bit of a jigsaw puzzle. And
hmm.
just as I've had to work my way through it as a jigsaw puzzle, I think that's part of what people will experience when they're watching the film on the night of our screening.
Mm,
Aha,
mm.
all well explained. Bill, I'll bring you into this now. Tell me about your
Yeah.
response and decision to program the film as part of Unknown Pleasures.
Oh, well, for me, the film actually speaks of the magic and the beauty of cinema overall. And sometimes, as cinephiles and just kind of general kind of film lovers, we're obsessed with, these kind of notions of, narrative or documentary that's, got a clear kind of authorial guiding kind of voice to it. And so something like home movies are kind of discounted that, but for me it's kind of like, every human being on the planet is precious, is worth the same as every other human being. uh, don't tell Trump that. But and so, this idea of capturing, lives on screen,
Hmm.
on film, it is this impulse that a lot of people have had over the years and still have now, especially with their mobile devices, of course. In fact, there's a plethora of images and videos on people's phones, and most of those will be lost in time, of course. And unless the Peter Tammer of 50 years from now will, not you, Peter Tammer, yourself, but a Peter Tammer type in 50 years kind of discovers these old kind of mobile phones with the data on them. Um, so
Let them
yeah,
have
the
it.
idea of home movies and then a step on from that, found footage where someone else, not related to the family, actually finds the footage and decides to resurrect it the way Peter has.
As a
It's a
tribute to
beautiful
them,
thing. Sorry, Peter?
as a tribute to the people.
It
Hmm.
is, yeah. It's like honoring them, even though Peter doesn't know them. And so we watch these people and we kind of do wonder about them and um how are they connected? We like Peter said, it's like this jigsaw, but that's all kind of obvious kind of stuff. For me, it's still about the beauty of cinema and the way Peter's restored it, where the images really come to life. It is like a very unique kind of project that I'm almost in awe of, because other filmmakers, like experimental filmmakers over the years, who've dealt with found footage, they basically do it in a certain way to either experiment with the footage, or to highlight social, cultural kind of aspects of life from the past or from a particular culture or region. So in this case, it's something that kind of floats, which I really like. Yeah.
Yes.
You've raised a couple of things in there, Bill, that I really love about the film, and one of them is the way, for example, you're talking about pure cinema, and I like the idea of him using the camera to engage everybody on the trip. So we don't know this guy; he never appears in the film,
Mm.
or he might appear in one scene that I've
Yeah.
highlighted, and I've put that in at the epilogue. That he might have been the man in one scene where the ladies show off their golf swings to each other and that. Um, but we can't be sure that's him. And if that's not him, I don't have any other scene where I think we see the guy who shot the film.
Mm.
Uh, and then there's things like that people appear and disappear in mid action. For example, he gets a guy to walk across the street. There's a, you may recall when they get back to Australia in the last part of the film, they're traveling down from the Queensland, northern Queensland, down towards Brisbane. And he starts off with this woman riding her bike up the street and a man on another bike behind him in a couple of cars. And then he gets a guy to walk across the road. The guy disappears halfway across the road because he didn't keep the camera running. And you think, did he do that deliberately, or did you can't
Mm.
even be sure whether it was a set-up shot or a casual shot. And why does
Mm.
the man disappear halfway across the road? Anyhow, so there are things like that about it. And then there's another one where, at the very early part of the film, he engages this young man who's wearing a pinstripe suit on his way to work in the city near the Botanic Gardens in Melbourne, and he gets this guy to do walkthroughs for him because he's camera testing. He's getting to know his camera. And he does this long follow shot as the guy walks across the grass towards a pathway where he pauses. And you can see that he's already formed a relationship with this young guy who's doing walks for the camera, and they've never. You can assume they've never met before, and then he does a few more shots, and the guy comes back again to do another walkthrough. So he must have hung around while he was doing those other shots, and so there are little bits and pieces like that that intrigue me.
Mm.
There is some fascinating stuff because it's 1950, 51. I think I know why that guy disappeared. He was a communist spy and he was being picked up by ASIO.
And then, another thing that I had fascinating with is that it brought back memories of my childhood in Melbourne. I'll give you one specific example. There's one shot outside Flinders Street Station
Mm.
that shows a COR truck. Now, most people wouldn't know that there was an oil refinery called Commonwealth Oil Refinery that was very active in those days when we had our SEC and all that. And that COR truck is radiant. It's got this radiant color to it, and there are a couple of suspect ASIO guys talking to each other in that in the shadows of that shot.
Oh, goodness me. Yeah. Well, all brilliant stuff. I must admit, as I was watching the film, I thought this would be an ideal film for the National Film and Sound Archive. I wonder if,
No, no, we
no?
won't mention them. They're my enemies.
Oh, okay.
Let's
No,
pass over
they,
them.
they won't do anything with
Once
it,
you give
Peter.
your film, once you give your film to the National Sound Archive, Film and Sound Archive, it disappears out of your hands forever, and you
Yeah.
have to pay money to get it back to see what you might want to do with it.
Oh, I
Yeah.
see.
Hey, Peter Tammer.
Yeah,
It does raise the point, though, that now, as this film is completed, it can be submitted into the archive as a
it can be,
as a
but I'll
beautiful
leave
film
you
from
to
the
do that
legendary
after I.
filmmaker.
You can
Yep.
do that on my behalf when I've passed away. All right.
I will. I will.
No, let's leave the National Film and Sound Archive out of it, because one of my things, I'll give you one story now. I'm not going to mention the filmmaker's name, but I have a fellow filmmaker who's about my age. He made a beautiful film. It's only 2.5 minutes long. It's an animation piece. And he has never been able to get it out of the NFSA so that he can restore it himself. And it's sitting in a can somewhere in Canberra that nobody knows anything about the bloody film.
Oh, that's
Uh-huh.
sad. Very sad. Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
No, fair comment. So, it's screening, the film is screening March 18th as part of Unknown Pleasures. And you'll be there, of course, and there'll be a Q&A and with Bill, I suppose, or
Mm.
Yes, yes, with
uh,
me. Mm.
yeah, and I'm sure the audience will be fascinated by it because it's such a historic journey by this family, and I think there's so much to unpack in terms of
Okay, Peter,
various
let me
scenes.
ask you a question. Did you have a favorite scene while you were watching
Favorite
it?
scene. It all sort of washed together as one flowing narrative in a sense, documentary narrative. I like the way they approach their overseas travels with a slight hint of that Western civilization view of other countries.
Mm.
You
Yes.
can't
That's an
avoid that
interesting
when you
one.
see. You can't avoid our colonial past when you watch them going through Asia, can you?
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and that in
See,
itself
I
is
love
interesting.
little scenes
Yep.
like when the ladies are in the rickshaws, and I love the scene where he gathers the women on the deck, and they must be having a farewell scene, and they've all been dressed up to be in this parade on the deck where they are stationary, and the camera pans across them. Then he gets the ladies to shake hands with each other, which is not normally what you expect ladies to be doing, shaking hands.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And then you get this scene where he gets the women to actually parade for the camera. And it's a cinematic shot that, I reckon Fellini or Visconti would have been bloody proud of.
Mm, mm.
It is great. I mean, there's so many fascinating scenes, and I wonder too if you would then release it then on DVD with commentary, and other
Oh, that could follow.
information.
Peter, I don't have any plans for this film after the screening. So we have this one screening at Bill's, the cinema that Bill shows films at with Chris Lasky and other people. And it's an absolute gem of a place because it's so beautiful and comfortable, but it's only got 57 seats. So we'll have up to 57 people will see the film on the night. We'll have Q&A. They will be watching the film and they'll be allowed to talk while the film's going on, but they won't be subjected to a commentary or music pushing them around to think this or that or feel this or that about the shots, right? Or the scenes.
Mm.
And then after the screening is over, we will have people giving us their opinions of what we could do from that point on.
Hmm.
But at this moment, I think I'm sort of finished with it. Like, I don't know if someone else wanted to do something to take the film another step further. I think I'd be open to that, if it was a good idea. But
Mm.
I don't think I can do any more with it.
Hmm. I can also see a special screening at Acme, where of course you'd have more seats and a bigger audience, and
Yeah,
they could well be interested in screening it, I'd say.
yes, we could. We
Mm.
could.
Yep. Mm.
And there are other people. For example, my friend Jeff Gardner, who runs Cinema Reborn, he might take an interest in the
Ah,
film and schedule a screening there. So who knows where it might go after this? But I
hmm.
haven't got a plan. Bill and I have not discussed anything that follows this screening yet.
Oh, I don't know, Peter. You told me that after the screening you might get some ideas and do different versions, and but I think maybe you've done such a big job
Well, there
on
is a
getting
there
it to
is a
where it is
possibility.
now.
Hmm.
There is a possible version that would, because my sister's friend Nelson, who's now a friend of mine, has composed music for two scenes. And I don't want to show the film on that night with just those two scenes at the end of the screening,
Hmm.
because it's sort of like it doesn't feel right to show, even though I love his music, it doesn't feel right to put it into the context of that screening. And I've discussed that with Nelson. But I would give Nelson, carte blanche to do a version of the film with music.
Hmm. That would be good. Yeah. And another thing with the Acme screening, I'm suggesting they could run it with a newsreel about the 1950s, to put the film into some sort of social and historical context as well, because I
You're
can
right.
see this being a big package.
You could indeed. See, you're thinking about it in ways that I've never thought of it. You and Bill think in ways that are different. I think of things about a film like this, particularly from the point of view of being a filmmaker. And I can tell you that in reconstructing and restoring this film to the standard I got it to, I have put myself in the position of how would this guy think? What would he think about the ways I've gone about restoring it? Would he approve? And I came to a decision in earlier on in my process, like a year or two ago, that he would probably be very excited that I got rid of some of his camera shakes, that I got rid of some of his out of focus stuff, and
Mm,
that I restored semi out of focus stuff to now be looking like it is in focus because I'm not doing any harm to his intention
mm,
on the film. I'll give you an example. When he started to shoot a scene, he often moved the camera to triggering the camera on and off. It's a wind up camera, Bolex or something like that, right? And then when he comes to the end of a shot, he lets it go and the camera moves. So we had all these terrible movements at the beginning and end of shots.
mm.
And I'm sure that he would agree with me. The film's better without those.
Yeah, no, your editing process is fantastic. It's almost seamless in terms of the way it all flows. So congratulations. All
Good. I'm
right.
glad you said that, Peter. It
Yes.
gives me heart.
No, I was really quite impressed. I wanted to know more about the family and their thoughts and so on. But anyway, no, excellent stuff. All right, I'm running out of time. Bill, tell me more about the
And
screening.
another thing
Yeah,
before
go
we
on, Peter.
finish, Before we finish, I
Go
would
on,
like to
Peter.
just say one thing about it, and that is that all the time I've been editing, I've been wondering about all those people and the lives that they lived after that film.
Right.
Mm.
That's fascinating in itself. Yeah. All right, Bill, let's hear
I'm
more
done.
about the screening, how people can get tickets, all that sort of thing.
Yes, the screening is on Tuesday, March 18 at the Thornbury Picture House. And, people can find tickets
Picture
actually
House.
on Thornbury Picture House's own, website. But otherwise, if you look up Unknown Pleasures film screenings through Google, you can discover the program notes that I've written and some pictures and the trailer for the film and that kind of thing. And so yeah, that's March 18. That's at the time of 8:35 p.m.
Ah,
So it's that second session that the cinema puts on, which is the later session in the evening. And even on a Tuesday night, we still tend to get the cinema, close to full each time
hmm.
we put a screening on. So that's heartening because these are special screenings, of course, and sometimes like one-off screenings of
Hmm.
films. And I just wanted to plug the April screening we're
Yes.
doing, which is quite a special one. It's on April 15. And it's one of my favorite Australian films of all time, which I know Peter Tammer doesn't think too much of. And that's the film Pure Shit from
Ah,
1975. So, according to mathematics, it's the 50th anniversary this year of the
hmm.
film, and I'm all for championing it over Picnic at Hanging Rock, which I think is still a fine film. But for me, they're the two crossroads. That's the fork that exists in Australian cinema. 1975 breakthrough year, but well, there were two roads, and no one was going to go down the road of pure shit, a heroin kind of
Yeah.
film. But anyway, so that's on in April, which I'm excited about. We've got the producer of the film, available for that film for that screening as well.
Oh, excellent. That's great coming up in April. I really like Pure Shit, and I agree with you about your comments and so on. So excellent stuff. Bill, I'll just ask you quickly, seen anything of late that impressed you, apart from Peter Tammer's film, of course?
Oh, me, yeah. Oh, look, I mean, just the obvious things like The Brutalist and A Complete Unknown, which are both really fine films, and yeah. Chalamet in Complete Unknown. Yeah, I think he does actually genuinely tap into something. So
Hmm.
it's pretty impressive. his representation of Dylan. So I've seen those films, and yeah, yeah. Hopefully, I'll just get to see more films as time goes along.
Yes,
Because I do put a lot of time into these screenings that I run. So
of course.
yeah. What about you, Peter Tammer? Have you seen any
Yes,
film recently that you've liked?
Um, no, I haven't got any that I would rave about, but I did enjoy watching one called Coherence on television on a streaming, a sort of a sci-fi Borgesian script made on a very low budget, set in I think maybe California, certainly California, maybe San Fran, I'm not sure, but anyhow, it was a beautiful piece. Um, and it intrigued me. But I haven't seen many that I could rave about in the last couple of years.
fair enough, fair enough. All right, I'm now out of time. So, we've been speaking to Peter Tammer, the director of the restored um, family home movie footage for Trip of a Lifetime, screening March 18th as part of Unknown Pleasures, and Bill Mousoulis, who is the co-curator of Unknown Pleasures. Peter and Bill, thank you so much for talking with me.
Thank you,
Well,
Peter.
you've got me working on it every year now, Peter. Once a
Annual
year,
event.
every year.
Great stuff. All the best. Talk to you both
See
some
you
other
Thanks,
later.
time.
Peter.
Okay.
Thanks.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye.